Excellent. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're going to debunk the most persistent myths about the Middle Ages. You know, the stories everyone has heard at dinner parties, in documentaries, or even in high school history class, which turn out to be completely false. So, before we begin, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons, but only if you truly enjoy the content I create. And don't forget to let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It's wonderful to see our community spanning the globe. Now, let's begin tonight's journey. Part 1. Dawn in Tudor England, a fragile survival. Your eyelids tremble and then flicker open. A weak, ash-gray sliver of light filters through the oiled parchment stretched across the small window frame, carrying with it the biting chill of early morning. Congratulations! You have survived another night. That alone is an achievement that many in this Tudor England cannot boast of. But don't celebrate too loudly. A dry, violent cough tears through your throat, and you can taste the bitter smoke from last night's fire still clinging to every fiber of your lungs. Your throat feels like you're gargling with wet wool. You are lying on what passes for a mattress. In reality, a ragged sack stuffed with lumpy, dry straw, which has likely not been changed since King Henry VIII still had 2 good knees. It gives off a blended odor of mildew, goat, and the sour stench of perpetual failure. The damp smell of the wattle and daub walls mingles with the sweat of unwashed bodies that haven't been bathed in weeks, creating a thick, cloying atmosphere that you breathe every day. Somewhere in this cramped room, there is a cat, but you are unsure if it is yours or just a wandering squatter carrying an army of fleas. Either way, you and it share this space, and you share its fleas as well. As the sun begins to rise, or at least as something resembling a dim light begins to leak through the window, your senses are immediately assaulted by an unmistakable aroma. It is your roommate performing the morning ritual, emptying the chamber pot. The creak of the small wooden window above opens, and without warning, only a cheerful shout of "Gardy-loo! Watch out for the water!" echoes from above. A stream of yellow-brown waste arcs foully through the morning air like a stinking comet, before splattering with a resounding splat on the rough cobblestones below. A luckless passerby lets out a curse, but his shout is quickly lost in the slowly awakening din of the street. You sit up. A big mistake. Your spine lets out a loud crack, and your knees crackle like dry kindling. A dull ache spreads through your body, a constant reminder of the grueling days of labor past and those yet to come. And then the cold hits, reminding you that there is no such thing as central heating. Sure, there is a fire in the corner of the room, but its effect is about as useful as a candle in a wind tunnel. Most of the warmth flies straight up, and what remains with you is the smoke. The chimney, if you can call it that, is merely a polite suggestion for the smoke's exit, not a truly effective structure. The smoke has moved in, unpacked its bags, and taken over the entire room. It makes your eyes sting, your throat itch, and dyes everything with a thin layer of soot. If you are poor, and let's be honest, you are sharing this single room with numerous other people. It could be your family, or it could be other lodgers. All of them snore like livestock, and sweat as if they were paid to do it. There is no privacy, there is no silence, only the steady, wet cough of your cousin huddled in the corner, a sound so familiar it has become a part of the silence. Occasionally, the quiet is broken by the scratching and squeaking of a summit meeting of rats taking place right beneath the floorboards. They are your uninvited, numerous, and brazen roommates. There is no mirror, but if there were, you would see a pathetic image looking back at you. Your hair is matted with grease, perhaps with bits of straw from your so-called pillow. Your teeth seem a little more crooked than yesterday, and your gums are swollen, an early sign of pre-modern scurvy. Your eyes are sunken, containing a special blend of exhaustion and resignation. It is time to start the day. You stand up, carefully placing your feet on the cold, sticky floor. The dim light is not enough for you to see everything clearly, but your sense of smell is on high alert. Try not to step in anything soft and damp on your way to the door. It could be last night's leftover food, a puddle of the cat's urine, or worse, something you'd rather not identify. The path to the rickety wooden door is a minefield of filth, and this is only the beginning. The world outside awaits you with a symphony of smells, noise, and chaos. But first, you must confront a more personal issue, one taking place right inside your own mouth. Part 3. Breakfast of Champions. If champions only ate bread and ale. With your mouth still aching and an empty stomach growling in protest, you drag your feet toward the rough wooden table. Breakfast in Tudor England is much like breakfast today, if you remove coffee, cereal, fresh fruit, and joy. The good news is you are about to eat something warm. The bad news is it is almost entirely beige and tastes like damp despair. Let's start with the beverage. Are you expecting a hot cup of tea? Tea is still a mysterious luxury from the Far East, reserved for kings and the fabulously wealthy for decades to come. Coffee? Don't be ridiculous. That magical black liquid is still being whispered about in Arabian markets, an ocean and a century away from your world. No, you are drinking ale. Yes, ale for breakfast. Not because you are an alcoholic, but because it is the only safe choice. The water in town is a deadly gamble. Water is drawn from communal wells or directly from the polluted river, which contains everything from human and animal waste to the carcasses of unfortunate animals. Drinking plain water is like inviting dysentery, the bloody flux, or typhoid, into your body. Everyone knows that water is dangerous, possibly even containing ghosts. So, everyone drinks ale. Children drink a weak version called small beer, which is essentially water that has been boiled with a little malt, enough to kill the bacteria and provide a few calories. Pregnant women drink ale. Monks drink ale. They even brew the best. Batches in the monasteries, muttering prayers while possibly silently judging your drinking habits. Your ale, of course, is not the fine kind. It is thin, slightly sour, and has a strong yeasty taste. But it is safe, and it is liquid bread, providing necessary energy for a long day. Now, let's move on to the solid food. On the table is a loaf of bread. But do not picture soft, fragrant loaves. Your bread is coarse, dark brown, and has a texture somewhere between edible and exfoliating material. If you are a peasant, it is made from rye or barley, known as maslin. Tudor doctors warned that this type of bread caused wind and melancholy. They were right. After a few bites, you feel both rising within you, along with a mild jaw injury. The crust is so hard it could be used to sharpen a knife. The inside is dense, sticky, and requires a great deal of chewing before it can be swallowed. Sometimes you can even feel small, gritty bits in it, a gift from the chipped millstones. Butter? That is a luxury. A golden slab of butter is a sign of wealth, something you would only see on your Lord's table. Perhaps you will have a little lard to spread on your bread, making it slightly easier to swallow. Eggs? Maybe, if the single, scrawny hen your family owns hasn't gone on strike. Bacon? Only if you are extremely lucky and own a pig. Raising a pig is a major investment. It eats all the scraps, and come autumn, it will provide meat for the entire winter. Your piece of bacon, therefore, is a treasure. It is heavily salted so it won't spoil, and it is more fat than meat, more lard than lean. But it's salty, greasy. Taste is the height of extravagance on your dry piece of bread. If you are wealthy, congratulations. Your beige breakfast has just been upgraded to off-white. You will not eat maslin bread, but manchet, a fine, white bread made from the best wheat, the ultimate symbol of refinement. You will have a slab of cheese as hard as a roof tile, and a hard-boiled egg cooked so thoroughly that its yolk has turned grayish-green and wonders what it did to deserve this fate. Jam? No, that requires sugar, and sugar, as we know, is incredibly expensive. Instead, you have honey, as long as you don't mind a few bee legs in it. And fruit? Don't even ask. Fresh fruit was considered dangerous. According to the theory of humors, eating fresh fruit, especially in the morning, could cause an imbalance of the fluids in the body, leading to illness. Everyone lived in constant fear of upsetting their inner moistures. Therefore, fruit was usually baked into oblivion in pies to neutralize its dangerous properties. You must eat quickly. You have no time to linger. A long day of labor lies ahead. Whether you are hauling heavy buckets of water from the village well, sitting at a loom weaving wool in a dimly lit room, or pretending to understand the Book of Common Prayer in church, your energy must come from something. And that something is bread. Always bread. No pancakes, no smoothies, no avocado toast. Just bread, ale, and the lingering sensation that your mouth is somehow drier after eating. In Tudor England, breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. It is simply the one that reminds you that you are still alive, and possibly slightly intoxicated. Part 4. Tudor Fashion. Dressed to die. After fueling yourself with a meager meal, it is time to face a ritual no less complex and time-consuming. Getting dressed. In the 21st century, one can get dressed in a few minutes. In Tudor England, it is a process, a struggle that requires layers, assistance, if you're lucky, and a willingness to feel like a tightly packed sausage for the next 12 hours. The fashion motto of this era could well be, if it's not stiff, itchy, or, potentially, flammable, you're wearing it wrong. Everything begins with the innermost layer, the only thing that directly touches your skin, and the only item that is washed with any relative frequency. It is a linen shirt. Of course, your linen is a coarse, unbleached type that feels like light sandpaper against your skin. It is long, reaching nearly to your knees, and its primary function is to absorb the sweat and grime from your body, protecting the more expensive outer layers of wool from your body odor. For the nobility, this shirt would be made from the finest linen, smooth as silk, perhaps with embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Yours is simply a sack with sleeves. Next comes the lower body. You do not have trousers. You have hose, which are essentially two separate long stockings made of thick wool dyed a dull, earthy brown. Pulling them on is a challenge. They must be pulled taut and tied to your doublet with small leather laces called points. You must tie them very tightly, otherwise they will shamefully slide down around your ankles. This tightness nearly cuts off the circulation to your legs, but that is the price of fashion. Between the two hose to cover your private parts is a codpiece, a padded pouch tied to the front. It began with a practical purpose, but over time it evolved into a boastful symbol of masculinity, becoming increasingly padded and ridiculously decorated. The next layer is the doublet. This is the main garment for the upper body, a type of tight-fitting padded jacket. Yours is made of coarse, itchy, but durable wool. The padding is not just for shape, but also provides a bit of protection, like soft armor. Fastening it is a nightmare. A dense row of buttons made of wood or bone runs down the front, designed by some sadist. You must use all your strength to pull the two edges together while your other hand tries to push each button through a stiff buttonhole. It squeezes your torso into the shape of a decorative wine bottle. If it is cold, you might wear a leather jerkin or a thick wool coat on top. Now, look over at your wife or sister. Their struggle is exponentially more complex. After her linen undergarment, called a smock or chemise, she will put on stockings and secure them with garters. Then comes 1 or 2 layers of petticoats for warmth and volume. Next is the upper. body, the bodice. It is stiffened with strips of wood, whalebone, or starched buckram. It is not designed to support but to flatten the chest, creating a flat, tubular silhouette. It is so tight that it can realign your internal organs and makes taking a deep breath an impossible feat. If she is from a slightly better-off class, she might wear a farthingale, a cone-shaped cage-like structure made of wicker or metal, worn under the skirt to create the fashionable triangular shape. Walking through a narrow doorway with this contraption is an art form. Finally comes the main gown on the outside. The sleeves were often a separate component, tied onto the bodice, allowing for flexible style changes. All of this is topped with a hat or headdress. A proper woman never shows her hair in public. Your wife will wear a simple linen coif, while a noblewoman would wear complex gable or French hoods decorated with pearls and jewelry. The goal is not comfort. The goal is status. Your clothing screams your place in society. The sumptuary laws even explicitly dictated who was allowed to wear what. Purple and crimson, reserved for royalty. Cloth of gold or ermine fur. If you wore them without the proper title, you could be fined or even imprisoned. Your clothing is a social uniform you cannot take off, and do not think these clothes are clean. Washing outer garments of wool or velvet was extremely rare. Water and harsh soap could permanently ruin expensive fabrics and dyes. Instead, people brushed, dusted, and aired out their clothes. To mask the smell of Tudor life, perfume was used liberally. You would sprinkle lavender water or carry a pomander filled with herbs and musk. If you smelled like lavender and desperation, you were doing it right. Finally, the shoes. They are made of hard leather with wooden soles. There is no concept of cushioning or arch support. By midday, your feet feel as if they have been excommunicated from the rest of your body. Now, you are fully dressed. An armor of wool and linen, itchy, tight, and slightly smelly. You do not wear clothes to express yourself. You wear clothes to survive the day without fainting, falling over, or accidentally setting yourself on fire from your own sleeves, all in the name of looking socially acceptable. You open the door, ready for the next challenge, a casual stroll through town. Part 5. A stroll through town, where sanitation is just a dream. You take a deep breath to steel yourself, and immediately regret every life choice that has led you to this moment. The air outside is not fresh air. It is a nearly tangible wall of smells, each one more horrendous than the last. It is a symphony of rot. You can distinguish the sharp ammonia of human and animal urine that is soaked into the earth, the musty smell of rotting vegetables thrown from kitchen doors, the metallic tang of blood and offal from the butcher's stall down the street. And enveloping it all is the foul odor of hundreds of unwashed bodies crammed into a small space. The street is not paved. It is not even level. In winter, it is a sea of thick mud, and in summer, it is a choking cloud of dust. Year-round, it is a chaotic cocktail of animal dung, human waste, leftover food, and the occasional carcass of some animal that no one has had the courage to poke. The concept of Tudor sanitation was more aspirational than practical. You begin to walk, your wooden-soled shoes clattering on the hard earth. Your eyes must constantly scan the ground, not to avoid eye contact, but to avoid the traps everywhere. A still steaming pile of horse manure, a stagnant puddle of suspiciously colored water, or the remains of someone's dinner from last night. Suddenly, a familiar shout of "Gardyloo!" echoes again from a window above you. You react instantly, jumping to one side just as another stream of liquid and solid waste pours down onto the spot where you were just standing. It splashes everywhere, soiling the hem of your hose. A man walking behind you is not so lucky. He catches a portion of it and lets out a resounding curse, shaking his soiled arm in disgust. No apology is offered from the window above. It simply slams shut. It is a daily risk of urban life. The problem of waste on the ground was so severe that footwear had to evolve to adapt. The better off wore pattens, a type of wooden overshoe strapped beneath their real shoes. They elevated the wearer a few inches above the ground, helping them avoid sinking into the street like a sad biscuit in a cup of tea. Walking on them turned a simple walk into a combination of tightrope walking and parkour over unspeakable obstacles. Now, factor in the livestock. They are the free citizens of the town. Pigs, often with a metal ring through their noses to prevent them from digging too deep, roam everywhere, serving as the town's natural and extremely inefficient waste disposal system. They root through piles of garbage, eating whatever they can swallow. A flock of geese parades through the street with an air of authority, hissing at anyone who comes too close. Horses, the primary mode of transport, have one job: to relieve themselves exactly where you are about to step. And since no one cleans up after them, unless by accident, the road becomes a glorious stew of hoofprints and horror, and God help you if it rains. Then the entire street turns into a slow-moving, viscous slurry of filth, flowing towards the nearest ditch like a liquid monument to poor planning. One wrong step, and you will find yourself ankle-deep in Tudor regrets. You cannot simply tiptoe around this mess. Most cities were crowded, noisy, and extremely enthusiastic about pushing wheelbarrows straight into your shins. Street vendors shout to advertise their goods. Hot meat pies, salted herring, ale. Apprentices shove each other. A beggar holds out his tin cup in front of you. If you trip and fall, your dignity will be gone, possibly your purse, and definitely your appetite. Oh, and the smell. Imagine a hot compost heap having a nervous breakdown. The stench was so overwhelming that the wealthy often carried pomanders, small perforated metal balls filled with fragrant herbs and spices like cloves, musk, or ambergris. They would hold it to their nose when passing through particularly smelly areas. It was not a fashion accessory. It was a survival device. In short, if you are used to clean streets, garbage collection services, or the miracle of plumbing, Tudor England would treat your senses like a chew toy. Every step is an adventure, every breath an act of bravery. You have survived the night, and now you must survive the street to begin your workday, a short but perilous journey. Part 6. The Social Ladder. A ladder you cannot climb. After successfully navigating the minefield of waste on the street, you merge into the bustling crowd of the marketplace. This is where all social classes collide, a vibrant stage where the rigid order of the Tudor world is on full display. You see a merchant dressed in furs, a lawyer with his square cap, peasants carrying their goods to market, and perhaps, if you are unlucky, the carriage of a nobleman passing through, forcing everyone to scramble to the side of the road. Everyone has a place, and you are deeply aware of where yours is. Do you ask yourself, how do I move up in this world? The answer is simple. You don't. You stay put, like a decorative tapestry nailed to the damp wall of a castle. Tudor society was neatly arranged like a wedding cake made of stone and passive aggression. This structure was not just a social convention, it was considered a divine order ordained by God called the Great Chain of Being. In this chain, God was at the top, followed by the angels, then the king, the nobility, the clergy, the commoners, women, children, animals, and finally, plants and rocks. Every link had its place. To break this order was not just an illegal act, but a sin against God's will. Ambition was considered a dangerous disease. At the top of this human pyramid is the monarch, an almost divine figure whose power was believed to be granted by God himself. He could order your beheading just because your hat offended him. His word was law, and his wealth was unimaginable. Just below him is the hereditary nobility, the dukes, earls, and barons. They are the great landowners, the ones with true blue. blood. You might see one of them riding a horse through the square, towering over the common crowd. They wear velvet and silk, fabrics you are forbidden by law to wear, and are surrounded by a large retinue of servants. They do not walk on the same filthy street as you. They move in a world of their own. The next class is the gentry, the knights, squires, and gentlemen. They own land, have a coat of arms, and hold a local power as justices of the peace or sheriffs. But they do not have a noble title. They try to imitate the lifestyle of the nobility, building large houses and sending their sons to prestigious schools. Then there are the wealthy merchants and master craftsmen. They may have more money than some of the gentry, thanks to the wool trade or imported goods, but they lack the most important thing: land and lineage. No matter how rich they are still considered inferior to the poorest gentlemen, and, finally, at the bottom of it all, is you, a commoner. Perhaps you are a yeoman, a farmer who owns his own small piece of land, which makes you respected in your community. Or more likely, you are a tenant farmer, working on land owned by the lord, or worse, a day laborer, an apprentice, a servant. And even below you are the beggars and vagrants who were seen as a threat to social order. Being born into a low-class family was not just an inconvenience. It was a life sentence. You could not simply marry your way up. Marriage was a business. Transaction. A peasant would marry his daughter to the son of another peasant to merge two small plots of land. The nobility used marriage to create political alliances. A 16-year-old girl could be married off to a widowed old man 3 times her age, just because he had a title and suitable land. Education, for the rich. Land, for the richer. Rights. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Everything, from the clothes you wear, the food you eat, to the length of your sleeves, screamed your status. The sumptuary laws made sure of it. These were real laws. Want to wear purple? Sorry, that color is reserved for royalty. Silk fabric? Only for the nobility and their families. These laws turned society into a visual directory where everyone could instantly identify each other's place, and God forbid you ever get any other ideas. If you spoke too eloquently, dressed too finely, or seemed smarter than your station, people would look at you with suspicion. They might accuse you of being a witch, or worse, a traitor. Both of these charges came with an interesting side effect of being publicly executed in front of a cheering crowd and a man selling meat pies. Your job is to know your place, to speak when spoken to, and to work until you die. And if by some chance you attract the attention of a powerful person, congratulations. You will now be exploited more formally. Even religion did not help. The church reinforced the idea that God wanted you to be poor, that your suffering was noble, that your lack of food and excessive number of children was a divine blessing. What a comfort! And with that comforting thought, you head to your place of work, ready to begin a hard day's labor. Part 7. Work and Labor. Sweat, Tears, and Tetanus. If you are dreaming of a cozy tutor job with reasonable hours, health benefits, and perhaps a dental plan, allow us to introduce you to reality, now with more blisters and tetanus. Work in Tudor England was not something you did to fulfill your potential or build a career. It was something you did so you wouldn't die, at least not right away. From the crack of dawn until the sun set deep behind the hills, and sometimes well beyond that, your body was the primary tool. And if it broke, you were replaced, probably, by your own child. There was no concept of sick leave, vacation, or weekends. Sunday was for church, not rest. Rest was what you did when your body collapsed and nobody noticed for a few hours. Scenario 1. You are a farmer. This was the life of the vast majority of people. You do not own this idyllic patch of land. You rent it from the local lord, paying a fee. Your rent with a large portion of your harvest and with days of compulsory labor on his land. You wake up before sunrise, gnaw on a piece of bread as hard as a rock, and then spend the next 12 hours covered in mud, sweat, and possibly livestock. Byproducts. Your tools are crude. Your plow is made of wood, perhaps with only a small iron tip, and is pulled by a single ox that looks as tired as you do. Guiding it requires all your strength. You have to lean your full body weight on the handles, struggling to keep the plowshare straight while the ox reluctantly pulls it through the hard, stony soil. By the end of the day, your shoulders and back ache as if they have been tortured. When harvest season comes, the work is even worse. You are bent over for hours under the hot sun, using a small iron sickle to cut each stalk of wheat. Every movement is a strain on your back. The sharp sickle is always a threat, and a deep cut from a rusty tool could easily lead to infection and death. Your hands are calloused to the point that they feel like two pieces of wood, cracked and rough. Scenario 2. You are a craftsman in town. You think life in town would be better? Think again. Instead of freezing in a field, you get to freeze in a workshop, inhaling sawdust or lead fumes while working by flickering candlelight. If you are a blacksmith, congratulations. Your profession is basically medieval CrossFit minus the social media clout. You stand before a scorching hot forge all day, swinging a heavy sledgehammer, and the deafening clang of steel on anvil will slowly destroy your hearing. If you are a cooper, you make barrels until your spine resembles a decorative question mark. If you are a tanner, you have the smelliest job in the world. You spend your day soaking animal hides in pits of urine, lime, and dog dung to soften them. That disgusting smell will cling to your clothes, your hair, and your skin, making everyone keep their distance. Scenario 3. You are a servant in a noble house. You might not have to work outdoors, but you have traded your freedom for a roof over your head. You are on call 24/7. Your bed is a thin straw pallet in a hallway or under the stairs, ready to be woken by the ring of a bell or a shout. You wake up before dawn to light the fires, haul heavy buckets of water, and begin an endless list of chores. Your reward: leftovers, cold ones if you're lucky. You are completely dependent on the whims of your master, and a small mistake could get you beaten or thrown out onto the street. And do not forget women and children. Women did not escape this joyride of labor. In addition to giving birth repeatedly and praying for a few children to survive past childhood, they also had to shoulder a huge workload. They spun wool, churned butter, cooked over an open flame, tended the vegetable garden, brewed ale, and helped in the fields during harvest. Their work never ended. Children were expected to work as soon as they were old enough not to swallow the tools. They did the jobs that adults could not or would not do. Skinny young boys were sent up chimneys to clean them, crawling into tight, dark, soot-filled spaces. Other children worked in the stables, carried water, or chased birds from the fields. Childhood was a luxury. When the sun finally sets, you drag your exhausted body home. Every muscle screams. You are dirty, worn out, and have just enough energy to eat your meager dinner before collapsing onto your straw mattress. You have earned enough to live another day, but the price is that your body is slowly being worn down, and when it finally breaks, Tudor medicine will arrive to save you. Part 8. Medicine and Health. The art of dying, a little slower. Feeling a bit under the weather in Tudor England? Perhaps a sore throat, a slight fever, or a suspicious boil that seems to be whispering in Latin. Great. It is time to call the doctor. Just know that whatever is about to happen next, it is not science. It is more like medieval improv comedy, but with knives and leeches. The foundation of medicine in your era is based on an ancient and entirely incorrect theory, the 4 humors. It was believed that the human body was composed of 4 primary fluids: blood, hot and moist; phlegm, cold and moist; yellow bile, hot and dry; and black bile, cold and dry. A healthy person was one in whom these four humors were in perfect balance. Every illness, from the common cold to the bubonic plague, was believed to be caused by an imbalance of one or more of these fluids. So, when you go to a healer with a raging fever, their diagnosis is simple. You clearly have too much blood, and the solution, to remove some of it, a lot of it. This is called bloodletting, and it was the most common treatment for nearly every ailment. The barber surgeon you met in a previous part would be happy to perform this service. He would use a small knife called a lancet to make a sharp incision in a vein in your elbow, letting the dark, thick blood flow into a metal bowl. He would watch the stream of blood, nodding sagely, and declare that he could see the poison leaving your body. The show would only end when you were weak and dizzy enough to forget that you were still sick. If you were lucky, they would stop before you fainted from blood loss. Another method was to use leeches, slimy, slithering creatures that would be placed on your skin to gently suck your blood. If you were wealthy, you could afford to see a real physician, a man who had studied at a university. He would never touch you. His job was to carefully examine a flask of your urine, comparing its color to a chart, smelling it, and perhaps even tasting a little. After examining the urine and consulting your astrological chart, because the position of the stars, obviously, affected your bile, he would make a learned diagnosis and then instruct the barber surgeon to perform the bloodletting. But you are poor, so your health care comes from the local wise woman, your cousin who knows about herbs, or a man selling potions from a rickety cart. Common treatments included strange and sometimes dangerous things. Have asthma or a dry cough? Try applying a plaster of warm cow dung to your chest. It was believed the heat and vapors from the dung would soothe your lungs. Have an open wound? Stuff it with garlic. This, surprisingly, sometimes worked because garlic has natural antibacterial properties. Or you could cover the wound with a mixture of honey and cobwebs to stop the bleeding. Feel like you're possessed by evil spirits or have a stomachache. Drink a little mercury. It was believed this liquid metal would flow through your body and chase away evil spirits. It would also slowly poison you, but that's just a minor detail. Surgery was a final nightmare. There was no anesthesia. The closest thing you could get to pain relief was alcohol, which also served as the disinfectant, the surgeon's courage, and your ride into unconsciousness. The amputation of a gangrenous limb was performed with a bone saw, while 4 strong men held you down. The surgeon's only mercy was his speed, and let us not forget the plague. When it arrived, which it did often, the doctors, those brave enough not to flee, would wear bizarre costumes. They wore a long leather gown, and, most terrifyingly, a mask with a bird-like beak. This long beak was stuffed with fragrant herbs, like mint, lavender, and camphor. They did not do this to look like harbingers of death. They believed in the miasma theory. That disease was spread by foul-smelling air. They thought the herb-filled beak would purify the poisonous air before they breathed it in. It did not work, but it did create one of the most terrifying images in the history of medicine. In your world, you do not really get cured. You simply survive the illness, and you survive the treatment. The two are often equally dangerous. Health is not a default state. It is a temporary grace, a brief pause between periods of pain and sickness. And when human cures failed, people could only look to the heavens and pray, hoping that their souls would be saved, even if their bodies were not. 9 and 15 Part 9. Religion. Pray the right way, or you will be burned alive. In a world where medicine is a gamble and death is ever present, belief in the afterlife is not an option but a necessity. But in Tudor England, you do not choose your religion. Religion chooses you, usually with the force of a royal decree and the subtlety of a brick through a stained glass window. This was not a time of peaceful theological reflection. It was a time when kings and queens played a game of spiritual, musical chairs, and everyone else had to pray in whichever direction the throne was facing that week, or risk losing their head. Literally. For 1,000 years, England had been a devoutly Catholic nation. The lives of you and your ancestors were governed by the church calendar, the seasons of Lent, the saints' feast days, the rituals of baptism, marriage, and burial. You grew up with churches full of color, with statues of the Virgin Mary and the saints, with stained glass windows telling stories from the Bible, and with the mysterious Latin Mass. The distant Pope in Rome was the supreme spiritual father. Then came King Henry VIII. Wanting a male heir and infatuated with Anne Boleyn, the king sought to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. When the Pope refused, Henry did the unthinkable. He broke away from Rome. With the Act of Supremacy in 1534, the king declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. For an ordinary person like you, this change was a seismic shock. Suddenly, everything you had ever known about faith was turned upside down. The Pope you were taught to revere was now branded the Antichrist. Your loyalty no longer belonged to Rome, but to the king. He was now not only the master of your land and your taxes, but also the master of your soul. Then came the dissolution of the monasteries. The ancient, beautiful buildings where monks prayed, cared for the sick, and helped the poor were shut down and plundered. Their wealth was seized by the crown. For you, this meant that the only place that might offer a charitable meal or a free herbal remedy was gone. Next, under the short reign of Henry's devoutly Protestant son, King Edward. The Reformation went even further. The colorful churches of your childhood were stripped of their beauty. Statues were smashed, murals were whitewashed, and stained glass windows were destroyed. The Latin Mass was replaced with services in English from the Book of Common Prayer. Everything became simple, austere, and alien. You were forced to relearn how to pray. But then Edward died, and his half-sister, Mary Thurin, a fervent Catholic, took the throne. The religious pendulum swung back violently. Mary was determined to return England to the Catholic faith. The Pope was recognized again. The Latin Mass was restored. And those who refused to renounce their Protestant faith faced a horrific consequence, being burned alive at the stake. The era of Queen Mary is called Bloody Mary for a reason. Nearly 300 Protestants were executed for heresy. The atmosphere became thick with fear and suspicion. Owning an English Bible, once encouraged, could now be a death sentence. Neighbors informed on neighbors. A careless word in a tavern could lead you before a heresy court. You had to hurry back to the old faith, and you had to seem sincere, lest you become the next Human Torch. And then the pendulum swung once more. After Mary's death, her half-sister, Elizabeth Fürster, ascended the throne. Elizabeth was a Protestant, but she was a pragmatic politician. She created a middle way, a Protestant Church of England that still retained some rituals and structures familiar to Catholics. Her goal was stability, not theological purity. As the narrator said, as long as you weren't too Catholic or too Protestant and you didn't stir the pot, you could probably survive. But probably is a deeply unsettling word. Attendance at the Church of England services was mandatory. If you were a secret Catholic and refused to attend, you were heavily fined. If you were a Jesuit priest caught on English soil, you would be tortured and executed. Imagine your life. Your grandparents were Catholic. Your parents had to change their faith under Henry. You were raised Protestant under Edward, forced to become Catholic under Mary, and are now Protestant again under Elizabeth. Religion is not a source of stable comfort. It is a political minefield. You go to church on Sunday, you mumble the correct prayers, you sing the correct hymns, and you listen to sermons that are often thinly disguised political speeches. You do not find faith in Tudor England. You cling to whichever belief system won't get you boiled alive that month, and you mutter your true prayers through gritted teeth while always looking over your shoulder. Part 10. Plague Season. The uninvited guest who arrives. Every year, just when you thought that life in Tudor England couldn't get any worse, a surprise arrives. It's plague season. It's like pumpkin spice season in the modern world, but with more screaming and far less cinnamon. The plague didn't just show up once and ruin everyone's month. It came back regularly like an unwanted dinner guest who never got the hint. Every few years, the Black Death, or one of its charming cousins, would waltz into town and start turning bodies into statistics faster than you could say, a mysterious swelling. It starts as a whisper. A cart driver from the next village fell ill and died within 2 days. A family at the end of your alley has shut their windows tight and no one has seen them come out. The mood in the town changes. The usual boisterous noise is replaced by a tense silence. People look at each other with suspicion. A cough in the marketplace can now make the crowd part. The familiar stench of the town seems to take on a new, more toxic meaning. People begin to believe it is the bad air, miasma, itself that carries the sickness. The wealthier start burning large bonfires of fragrant wood in front of their homes, hoping the smoke will purify the air. Then it gets closer. Your coughing cousin, with whom you share a corner of the room, begins to shiver. At first, you think, it's just a common cold, but then a violent fever hits. He shakes uncontrollably, his teeth chattering, even though the room is still stuffy and hot. His skin is burning to the touch. The next day, the telltale symptom appears. A lump, or bubo, begins to swell under his armpit. At first, it's just the size of a pebble, but it grows quickly, soon becoming as large as a chicken's egg, then an apple. It is taut, a dark red color that turns to purplish black. The pain makes him delirious, screaming whenever someone accidentally touches him. The next few days are a waking nightmare. The fever makes him speak nonsense. Other buboes appear in his groin and on his neck. Dark patches begin to appear on his skin as blood hemorrhages beneath it. He vomits blood. You and your family can only watch helplessly as he writhes in agony with no medicine that can help. Death, when it comes on the 5th day, is a mercy. Once there is a case in your house, you become an outcast. One morning, you hear the sharp sound of a hammer striking your front door. The town watch, their faces covered with cloths, have arrived. They nail your door shut from the outside, trapping everyone, the sick and the healthy, inside. A large red cross is sloppily painted on the door, along with the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us." You have been quarantined. It is a death sentence for the entire family. You are trapped with the body of your loved one, with fear and with despair. Food, if any is given, is passed through a small window on a long pole. Your neighbors will pray loudly that you don't sneeze near their livestock. Every night you hear the rattling wheels of the death cart and the mournful cry of its driver. Bring out your dead. Chaos engulfs the town. The rich fled to the countryside. At the first rumors, markets close, trade grinds to a halt, society disintegrates. People abandon their dying loved ones out of fear. The local blacksmith might also be your new midwife, because everyone else is dead or has fled. If you survive, perhaps because you have a natural immunity or simply through sheer luck, you will emerge into a changed world. The streets are eerily quiet. There are empty houses, families completely wiped out. But there is a strange consequence. Because of the severe labor shortage, survivors like you are suddenly more valuable. You can demand higher wages for your work. For a short time, those at the bottom of society gain a little power, but don't get too comfortable. The terror has passed, but the memory and the loss remain. And everyone knows that this is just a lull. Another wave will be along shortly. And this time, it might bring friends. Part 11. entertainment and leisure. Another's pain is my pleasure. So, you have survived the plague, extreme poverty, and a surprise heresy trial. Congratulations! It's time to treat yourself to a bit of entertainment. Just don't expect a Netflix binge or a relaxing walk in the park. Tudor leisure time was a combination of three elements: public humiliation, animal cruelty, and enthusiastically applauded death. Let's start with the biggest crowd pleaser: public executions. These were not just punishments. They were major events. People brought snacks. Parents brought their children. You would stand shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, gossiping about who was getting hanged, drawn, and quartered that week. The best seats were right by the scaffold, assuming you didn't mind getting a bit of blood on your bread. The atmosphere was like a festival. Street vendors pushed carts through the crowd, hawking ale and hot meat pies. The air was filled with noise, laughter, and anticipation. When the condemned was finally brought in on a cart, the crowd would boo, curse, and throw rotten vegetables at him. That was the opening act. Hanging was the punishment for common criminals. But this was not a quick death. The technique of the long drop to instantly break the neck had not yet been invented. The victim would be left dangling, kicking, and slowly suffocating for several minutes, a horrific spectacle that the crowd watched with rapt attention. Beheading, of course, was a privilege reserved for the nobility. It was considered a quicker and more honorable death. But that depended on the executioner's skill. If he was having a bad day or had drunk too much the night before, a clean slice could turn into 2, 3, or even 4 clumsy hacks. The crowd would cheer or boo depending on how entertaining the suffering was. Hanging, drawing, and quartering was the ultimate punishment, reserved for traitors. It was a brutal display of state power. The victim would be hanged until nearly dead, then laid on a table, disemboweled, and have his entrails burned before his own eyes while still alive. He would then be beheaded and his body divided into 4 parts. These body parts would then be displayed at the city gates across the kingdom as a gruesome warning. If you found those scenes still too tame, welcome to bear baiting. A bear, yes, a real bear, was chained to a post in the middle of a pit. Then large mastiff dogs, specially trained, would be released to attack it. The bear would often win, killing several dogs until it was exhausted and torn to pieces. The crowd placed bets, screamed, and was completely captivated. If you felt a bit more refined, you could go see a play at the local theater. In the late Tudor period, theaters like Shakespeare's Globe became popular, but don't imagine a polite audience. The viewers, especially those standing in the cheap area in front of the stage, were loud, drunk, and interactive. If a scene bored you could throw a turnip at the stage. It was interactive theater with produce. For more wholesome fun, there were cockfights, where people bet money on roosters tearing each other to death. Or you could gather in the town square for a classic pillorying, watching your neighbor get pelted with rotten food for the crime of stealing bread. Classical dancing and music did exist, but only if you weren't too poor or too busy dying, and games like dice and cards were enjoyed by many until the church condemned them as sinful distractions from proper suffering. In a world where life was short and brutal, entertainment reflected just that. Part 12. Love and Marriage. A land deal that comes with vows. Let's say, in a rare moment, amidst the chaos and brutality of a Tudor day, you have made it through. You've survived breakfast, put on your torturous outfit, dodged a shower of waste from above, and even applauded as a thief was put in the pillory. You stand in a corner of the market, and your eyes meet someone's across the muddy square. A spark ignites. Your heart races, your palms sweat, though that could also be the lice. Is this love? No, it is not. This is Tudor England. Romance. Here has less to do with soulmates and more to do with strategic land acquisition. Marriage in your time was, first, second, and third, a transaction. Love, if it ever showed up, usually arrived late, confused, and perhaps a little drunk. Families. Arranged matches the way they traded livestock. Dowries were exchanged, inheritances were secured, and the emotional well-being of the bride was considered somewhere below the question, how many goats does her father have? For the nobility, marriage was a political move on the chessboard of power. Your feelings were completely irrelevant. You could be a 14-year-old girl married off to a 50-year-old widower who remembered the Crusades. If he had a title and you had a healthy womb to produce an heir, it was considered a perfect match. Your marriage could secure an alliance, end a feud, or bring critical lands to your family. For common folk like you, things were a bit more flexible, but no less practical. You might marry someone because your family's cows graze in the same pasture, and merging the herds would be easier. A man was considered a good catch if he was healthy, didn't have a consumptive cough, and was set to inherit a plot of rented land from his father. A woman was considered desirable if she had a reputation as a hard worker, knew how to brew ale, and came from a family that could give her a cow as a dowry. These were the qualities that truly mattered. Courtship, as such, was largely a series of supervised negotiations disguised as affection. A young man might write you a love poem, sure, but only after confirming that your father owned at least 2 pigs and a decent patch of barley. And that poem was probably plagiarized from a local friar's collection of flirtatious psalms. Private dates did not exist. A suitor would visit the girl's home, sitting in the main room under the watchful eyes of her parents. Sex before marriage was technically a grave sin, which meant most people did it, then lied about it. Especially after a couple had been hand-fasted. Okay. Public and binding betrothal ceremony. If you were caught, or if the girl became pregnant, you would be hauled before the church court. There, you would face public humiliation, be fined, and be forced to marry immediately in front of the entire congregation. When the wedding finally took place, that's when reality set in. For women, marriage was more or less the start of a life, of full-time servitude. Her legal identity was absorbed into her husband's. Any property she brought with her became his. Her life would revolve around managing the household, constant childbirth, a game of roulette with death, as many women died in childbirth, and possibly being blamed for her husband's gout. For men, it was the end of bachelor freedom and the beginning of financial stress. He was now responsible for feeding a growing family. Adultery, rampant, discretion, minimal, divorce. Technically possible, but only if you were a king with a habit of executing your ex-wives. Otherwise, you were in it for life, or until the next. Plague took care of the paperwork for you. So, as you look at that person across the square, the spark in your eye is not one of romantic fantasy. It is one of practical calculation. She looks healthy. Hips seem wide, good for childbearing. Her father has a flock of sheep. Love might grow from this practical foundation, a quiet companionship forged through years of facing hunger, sickness, and hardship together. But the marriage itself is not a fairy tale. It is a business contract. Part 13. Personal Hygiene, a Failed Negotiation. With grime, if you enjoy hot showers, minty toothpaste, or the basic sensation of not being sticky at all times, then Tudor. England is not the vibe for you. The notion that Tudor people lived in a state of perpetual filth is not entirely accurate, but the truth is far more complex and bizarre. They did not love being dirty. They just had a completely different understanding of it, and their methods of cleaning were sometimes counterproductive. Let's start with bathing. The Tudors had bathtubs, yes, but they were largely decorative or used to store firewood. The average person bathed seasonally, which is a polite way of saying almost never. A full-body bath with hot water was an enormous and expensive undertaking. You had to haul water from the well, heat it over the fire, and pour it into a large wooden tub. The whole family would then likely use the same water in order of status. But the main reason people avoided bathing was not laziness, but medical fear. The prevailing medical theory of the time held that hot water would open the pores of the skin, allowing poisonous bad air, or miasma, to enter the body and cause disease. Ironically, they feared that bathing would make them more susceptible to the plague. Therefore, maintaining a protective layer of natural sweat and grime was considered by some to be a preventative health measure. Queen Elizabeth further was said to have bathed once a month, a frequency that was considered astonishingly and perhaps even eccentrically regular for her time. As for you, a commoner, you would be lucky to rinse your feet in a muddy stream between plowing fields and dying of trench mouth. Soap existed, but it was not the fragrant, gentle bars you know. It was made from animal fat, usually pig fat, and lye cooked from wood ash. It was a harsh, caustic detergent that could clean the dirtiest clothes but would also strip your skin of all oils and could be very irritating. So how did they deal with the stench? If you don't bathe, you have to mask the smell. And the Tudors were masters of this. The main solution was changing your linen undergarments. The shirt or smock was the layer that absorbed all the body's sweat and grime. A clean person was not someone who bathed frequently, but someone who could afford to change into fresh linen every day. The expensive outer layers of wool and velvet were protected and rarely washed. Perfumes and fragrant herbs were used liberally. People would sprinkle lavender water or rose water on their clothes. Imagine the smell of a wet dog and lavender trying to negotiate peace in your nostrils. It wasn't pleasant, but it was period accurate. Hair care, a losing battle. Lice were an unavoidable part of life. Everyone, from peasants to the queen, had to deal with them. Lice combs, often finely crafted from bone or wood, were an essential, personal item. Combing each other's hair was a common social activity. The nobility had a more drastic solution, shaving their heads and wearing wigs. The elaborate wigs you see in portraits were not just fashion. They were a practical way to deal with the lice infestation. The wig itself could then be cleaned by dusting it with flour or powdered bone. The Tudor smile, revisited. As mentioned, teeth were cleaned with cloth, soot, salt, or crushed oyster shells, all of which sound more like flooring materials than hygiene tools. Queen Elizabeth's teeth reportedly turned black from sugar. Since she was considered a trendsetter, others began to intentionally blacken their own teeth with a tar-like substance to look like her. That's right, the Queen's rotting smile became a fashion statement. In summary, the Tudor concept of hygiene was not about killing germs, they didn't know what germs were, but about managing appearances and smells. It was a world of carefully brushed but rarely washed outer clothes worn over clean linen undergarments, where strong perfumes tried to overpower body odor, and where a black smile was considered the height of elegance. Part 14. Justice and Punishment. Where the trial is just the prelude to the main show. Let's say you committed a crime. Perhaps it wasn't a big one. Maybe your children were crying from hunger and you desperately snatched a loaf of bread from a baker's stall. Or perhaps you had too much ale and insulted the tax collector. Or, God forbid, you had a thought. Congratulations, you have just earned a crash course in a justice system that is about 10% law and 90% theater. First, forget modern concepts like lawyers, rights, or a fair trial. There is no innocent until proven guilty. You are guilty from the moment you are accused. The trial, if there is one, is usually held quickly before a local magistrate or the Lord himself. It might take place right in the great hall of the manor. Your accuser will present their case. Your defense might be a mumble, a prayer, or just hoping that the judge is drunk and merciful. A word of advice: he won't be. The verdict is delivered. swiftly. The focus is not on finding the truth. The focus is on deciding the punishment. And the punishment must be public, it must be a deterrent, and ideally, it must be entertaining. For petty crimes, the top choice was public humiliation. The stocks. For your petty theft, this is the likely punishment. You will be led to the town, square and your ankles locked into a wooden board. You are fixed there, helpless, a living target for public contempt. The crowd will gather. Children will point and laugh. Your neighbors will throw at you whatever they have on hand, rotten vegetables, animal dung, and sometimes dead rats. The pain from the hard objects hitting you is only part of it. The humiliation is the real punishment. The pillory, an even worse version, reserved for crimes like fraud or lying. Your head and hands are locked, forcing you to stand in a painful, stooped position. You cannot dodge or use your hands to protect your face. You are completely exposed to the crowd's fury. The cucking stool, the preferred punishment for women considered scolds, gossips or nags, or for dishonest merchants. The victim would be tied to a chair at the end of a long pole and repeatedly dunked into a filthy pond or river to the cheers of the crowd. For more serious crimes, the punishments became more brutal. Whipping. You would be tied to a post and whipped with a leather lash in public. Each stripe that tore your skin was a reminder of the law's power. Branding. A red-hot iron would be pressed into your cheek or the palm of your hand, leaving a permanent scar. A V for vagrant. A T for thief. It was a mark of shame you would carry for life. Mutilation. Cutting off a thief's ears or cutting out a slanderer's tongue. This punishment not only caused pain, but also permanently marked you as a criminal in the eyes of society. And then there were the capital crimes, which we saw in the public entertainments: hanging, beheading, drawing, and quartering. Justice was not about rehabilitation. It was about spreading fear. It was a state-sponsored horror show, designed to remind everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. Every scream from the victim, every drop of blood spilled, was a lesson for those watching. You sit in the stocks, the sun beating down, your body aching and covered in unspeakable filth. The laughter and insults of the crowd ring in your ears. A few hours feel like a lifetime. When you are finally released at sunset, you do not feel relieved. You feel marked. The bruises will heal, but the shame will remain. You have learned your lesson. In Tudor England, justice is not blind. It sees very clearly, and it makes sure that everyone else sees your suffering too. Part 15. Sleep, a hazardous activity. Sleep. That magical time when your body recharges, your brain consolidates memories, and you are briefly allowed to forget that you are living in Tudor England. Except you are not allowed to forget, because here even sleep is a hazardous activity. After a long day of labor, humiliation, and perhaps fear, you return to your cramped, stuffy room. You do not long for a luxurious bed. You only long for oblivion. First, forget about plush mattresses. You will be lucky to sleep on a sack stuffed with straw, which smells of mildew, goat, and the disappointment of generations. If you were slightly better off, you might have a real wooden bed with a system of ropes crisscrossing the frame to support the mattress. From this comes the phrase, sleep tight, which originally meant literally to tighten the ropes before your back gave out. As for you, you probably just have the cold floor or a corner of the room. As for privacy, it is an impossible dream. The entire family often slept in one room: parents, children, perhaps a visiting neighbor, and the neighbor's dog. Even servants in wealthy households might sleep right at the foot of their master's bed. The concept of personal space had not yet been invented. Beds were not just crowded, they were strategic. People often slept in a half-sitting position, propped up by many pillows, because they believed that lying flat would cause the bad humors to flow to the brain. Windows and doors were sealed shut and stuffed with rags. This was not just to keep warm. People had a genuine fear of night air, believing that the damp, cold night air carried disease and plague. The result was that the room became a stuffy, hot box of stale air, sweat, and paranoia. Sleep itself was also divided. Many tutors practiced first sleep and second sleep. You would go to bed shortly after sunset, sleeping for about 4 to 5 hours until around midnight. Then you would naturally wake up for a quiet period of 1 or 2 hours. This was a time for reflection, prayer, quiet conversation with your spouse, checking on the fire, or even doing light chores by candlelight. After this waking period, you would go back to bed for your second sleep, which would last until dawn. And then there were the ever-present dangers. Fire. Most houses were made of wood, with thatched roofs, and candles were basically giant matches. Falling asleep with a candle still burning was the 16th century version of Russian roulette. A spark from the hearth could turn your home into an inferno in minutes. Insects, lice, fleas, bedbugs, all were part of the Tudor mattress experience. If you weren't scratching, you were probably already dead. The feeling of something crawling on your skin in the dark was a constant companion to sleep. Supernatural paranoia. The darkness was not empty. It was filled with spirits, demons, and witches. It was believed that this was the time they were most active. Sleepwalking could get you accused of being possessed by a demon. A nightmare was not just a bad dream. It was proof that you had been cursed. You drift into your second sleep, your exhausted body finally surrendering. And then, all too quickly, the first gray sliver of light once again leaks through the oiled parchment on the window. Your eyes flicker open again. You have survived another night. The dry cough again tears at your throat. The stench of the room again fills your nostrils. The snoring of the others continues its steady rhythm. Somewhere beneath the floor, the rats begin their conference again.